Yep.
There's your water.
182nd Infantry, 96th Infantry Division, and after the peace was signed, I was assigned to Company A, 311th Engineer Battalion, 86th Division, and I served in the 104th Division during the Korean War in the reserves, stationed in Fort Lawton, Washington. I retired as a T4 and when my enlistment was up in the reserves, I was a sergeant first class. And I worked for Continental Company when I was 16 years old, and I wanted to join the Navy when I was 17. But my mother, she wouldn't sign the papers, and I was pushing 18, and they were drafting it at 18, so I knew I was going to go one way or another. And I thought, well, they'll put me in a bakery someplace. And that didn't quite work out. I ended up in Camp Roberts, California, in a rifle company in the East Garrison. And the East Garrison was detached from the main garrison. And I was assigned to a rifle company, and there was a detachment of WWII trainees there, and things were a little different then. They had armed guards patrolling their area 24 hours a day. There was a black contingent of troops, trainees. We were a segregated army at that time, and in addition to that, there was Italian prisoners of war from the North Africa campaign, Rommel, and anyway, they had full reign of the area. They wore American uniforms with a Italian patch on their shoulder, and they on weekends, the Italian families would come in with their beautiful daughters, baskets of fruit, and they took over the rec hall, and they were having a great time. And there was a certain amount of animosity, and so every once in a while they'd find one of them hanging from a tree, and we figured it was the black troops. And the black troops probably figured it was us. But so I was in the rifle company, and towards the close to the completion of basic training, they had cut our time down. I don't know, they cut about 5 weeks off our training cycle. But somebody in the service battalion screwed up, and so I got sent over there in the cooks and bakers school, and I was probably there 3 or 4 weeks, and so I had a specialist MOS number. So I went overseas on a troop ship with about 2,000 other seasick GIs, and it wasn't a pretty sight. And we landed, we stopped in Hawaii, and then we ended up on Leyte at the end of the operation. And replacements, we were dropped off at different units, and I was dropped off at a heavy weapons company. That was 81 millimeter mortars and 30 caliber water-cooled Browning machine guns. And the section sergeant asked for volunteers for the machine gun sections, and nobody volunteered. So anyway, so then it was you, and you, and I was one of the U's. And I said, well, I was a cook and baker. And he said, well, you were a cook and baker. So I started out as third man in a machine gun squad. I carried a box of ammunition and a water canister for the machine gun jacket. And anyway, we went on a few forages into the jungles, and I seen a python that was about 30 feet long and had been run over by a snake, and probably a half a dozen Japanese planes that had been shot down were full of the Japanese paratroopers. But other than that, I didn't see any action at all on Lady, and we landed on Okinawa April 1st, 1945, and there wasn't really any resistance, seen a few prisoners. We were in the second invasion and a second wave, and we went in early because there wasn't any resistance. And the third day, we hit the Shuri line, which was their main line of defense, and there was two major banzai attacks in the Pacific War. One was on the island of Saipan, and the other one on the Shuri line, 5,000 Japanese. And the 96th Infantry was an interior division, along with it was either the 45th or 46th Infantry Division, and our line held, but the 46th, they breached the line, and the story is that the division band stopped them. But that was and shortly after that, we were taken off the line on May 1st, and we received 4,000 replacements. And the division had from 15,000 to 19,000 men, depending on the attachments. But there was 4,000 casualties, and basically, I figure that my mother's prayer and my grandmother's prayer saved me. The fact, the way things worked out, that I ended up in a machine gun instead of a machine gun. Wasn't any gravy train or anything, but I used to watch. We supported the riflemen going up the hills when they were advancing or withdrawing, and I used to watch them. And the flamethrower was the first one to get it, and the medic was the next one. They didn't wear any bands or anything. Excuse me. But get my thoughts going here. But anyway, it took incredible courage to do that. And like I say, at nighttime they usually put us out in the front of the lines, and we tried not to use the machine guns at nighttime because you become a target. But anyway, my division was the first one on Hacksaw Ridge, and we lost 500 casualties there. And I actually they didn't take the heavy machine guns up there, but I was in the position. I was on a hill called Chocolate Drop Hill, and when we couple things happened there. When we got to I started digging in, and I heard a shell coming in, and it hit, and it hit in the dirt that I had stacked around my hole. I hadn't finished digging my hole, and when I heard it coming in, I flattened myself. Mother Earth was was your best friend. And anyway, exploded, and I looked at it and hear this big mortar shell stand in that dirt that I had piled around my hole, and the casing ruptured but it was smoking there, and it came within inches of coming in the hole with me. And then on that same hill, Chocolate Drop Hill, my foxhole buddy had gotten killed, and it was a quiet time, and so I got up and went over the next hole to BS with the guys, and I no sooner got out of my hole than an artillery shell hit in the hole that I just evacuated, and so either one of them, they wouldn't have found pieces of me. And but on that same hill, that's when the Hacksaw Ridge, we call it the escarpment, and we had a good view of it, and there I never seen any they show in the movie. There's a lot of inaccuracies in that movie, and I never seen a net there when we went up, because there was trails up the side of it, and that's the way we went. And I watched a guy, George Kraft, win the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was going up the side of the cliff, and he had a line behind him feeding him satchel charges, and the front of there was caves in the face of the cliff, and he was taking out the caves with satchel charges, and he got up to the top, and we heard it was 60, but his citation says 30, and so but the battalion commander was standing right by my hole, and I heard him say, "Get that man's name, rank, and serial number." And so it was an incredible feat of courage. And there's 3 things that when you watch a war movie that they don't show. One, they don't have smell-o-vision. The other is the flies got enormous, and they got so big when they landed on you, you could see where they took a hunk out of you. So you can imagine dropping your drawers and swarms of flies on them, just swarming. So you were hopping here and hopping there, and the maggots. You could just watch a body disappear in front of you, but the smell was horrible. And I know one time I was trying to choke some ration down, and I thought, man, there were dead Japs all around me, and they were stinking. And so I thought, well, maybe if I go upwind a little bit, it'll be better. So I went upwind a little bit, and I thought, it stinks worse here than it did back there. And I looked down on my feet, and there's a lot of debris down there, leaves and whatnot. And I got my boots in the middle of a dead Jap corpse. And so anyway, I had to scrape my shoes off with my bayonet, and then I washed my shoes off with gasoline. And the only thing that happened to me, I had a lot of close calls, but I was walking over the crest of a hill one time, and a piece of spent shrapnel, it was just a small piece, it hit me in the cheek, and I pulled it out. And the other time was our mortars, our chemical mortars, dropped some rounds on us, and I got a small fragment of phosphorus in my shoulder, and I still got the scar. No Purple Heart. The medic put a Band-Aid on it and some sulfa, and that was it. But that's the only two things that happened to me. But I made it through Okinawa, and when I walked off Okinawa, every day's been a gravy day. And we left Okinawa early because of typhoon, and they didn't want the ships to get caught on the tied up. So we left early, and we ended up in the China Sea in a typhoon, and it was LST, they were flat-bottom ships, and they'd go up in the air and they'd bend in the middle, and then they'd whack and come down, and kept waiting for them to break in two. But we made it to Mindoro in the Philippines, and while we were at sea, there was the 381st Regiment left before we did, and they had a destroyer that was torpedoed in their convoy, but we had a torpedo. They told us a torpedo had been fired through, then missed the whole convoy. But anyway, while we were at sea, they told us that the first atomic bomb had been dropped. They said what they described it was a big bomb, and I forget whether we were still at sea or whether we had landed at Mindoro, but anyway, hostilities ceased, and shortly after that they surrendered, and we had been told that we would be one of the assault divisions into Japan, and so, you know, I hear all kinds of things about how horrible the atomic bomb was, but you can't imagine the joy and the happiness and the celebration that went on when the war ended, because, you know, they knew they'd live, and so it was just utter joy, and you know, you knew you'd never make it through another one, and it probably saved 1 million American lives, and it saved many millions of Japanese lives. So whatever they say about the atomic bomb, it is a bad thing. Bad thing then, bad thing now. But I thought it was a good thing. And anyway, my extent of my military service, Korean War started. I joined the 104th Division in station at Fort Lawton in Seattle, and I'd have probably stuck with it, but when my enlistment was up, I bagged it. But anyway, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
I've got some questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So to go back to the Philippines, you talked about seeing the Japanese paratroopers in those crashed planes.
Yeah.
Was that the first time you had seen dead enemy soldiers?
It was.
How did that make you feel, seeing...
Well, they smelled. You know, on Okinawa, they don't know, you know, they used to fire artillery shells with leaflets. I'll tell you about Aragachi, the last battle of Aragachi. The last battle in Aragachi was the last battle of the war, really, was Aragachi and we went into Aragachi when they lifted the artillery, and anyway, it was at dusk, and there were so many dead that it was like running over a carpet of bodies. And we got to the outskirts of Aragachi, and the ground was so hard we couldn't dig in, so we were exposed. And the Marines, we were on the far left flank of the line, and the Marines were supposed to be on our flank, and they weren't there. They were late arriving, and they came busting through the underbrush, and they were to our left front, and they were on higher ground, and they started firing into our positions, and we got that stopped. Finally got it stopped with a few casualties, and things settled down. Then in the middle of the night, a flare went up, and we just seen this mass of bodies coming at us, and so the whole line opened up, and you could hear them moaning and groaning, dying. And in the morning, there were just mounds of them out in front of us, and there was one guy down the line that got up, and I think he might have been a medic. He started walking towards him, and he got shot. So that was the end of that. But what the Marines, we didn't know it, but the Marines had a bunch. They had landed on the southern, very southern end of the island, and they'd pushed all these people in front of us. And the Japanese, when they were on the move, they pushed the civilians in front of them, and so it was a mixture of civilians and Japanese military. But so anyway, we after we got orders to about face, and the Marines and the Army, they made a skirmish line across the whole island, and our orders were to seal any caves that hadn't been sealed. There was thousands of them that had been sealed in those caves, and I mean civilians, whatever, mixture of them. But we anyway, and our orders were to seal any caves that hadn't been sealed, and to bury any dead that hadn't been buried. And that kind of pissed everybody off, because they figured, well, we killed them. They figured that was a rear echelon job. So anyway, we buried them with their heads and feet sticking out as a protest. And the officers knew how we felt, so they didn't do anything. So we buried them with their head and feet sticking out.
So how did you feel about the Japanese? You had to have some,
I hated them. I got a puddle jumper out here, and when I was looking for an automobile, I didn't want a Japanese one. Of course, all the Japanese I knew were dead and long gone. But I still have a certain amount of animosity toward them. And as an example, my wife's niece was with a group of students, and one of them in the group could speak Japanese, and they were at the Arizona Memorial, and they heard these Japanese students in there. They were making light of it, saying, oh, we did this, we did that, And so the one girl that could speak Japanese, she said, I understand every word you're saying. And so even though that generation is gone, they still are arrogant people. And they aren't all little either, because they had Imperial Marines on Okinawa. And the first one I seen, we were running across the field, and I seen this body in this ditch, and I couldn't believe what I seen. So I turned around and took another look, and it was a dead Imperial Marine, and they had to be 6 foot tall, and they were, I guess, the Northern Islands, they have big ones, and they had some big Japanese. They made 2 of me or 3 of me. And but there was a lot of things happening, you know.
So it never gave you any pause to fire at the Japanese or anything like that?
Pardon?
It never gave you any
No,
trouble shooting at them?
no, you know, it got to be kind of a content, you know, they figure they don't know how many Japanese civilians were killed, and that bothered me when you know, you seen, like, you know, babies, young kids, you know, kill women. That bothered me. But it didn't bother me at all with the military.
Did you guys hunt gold teeth or anything like that?
You know, there was one guy that did. I didn't.
What did you think of that practice?
Not too much. No, not too much. You know, I worked for my company for 47 years, and you know, of course I remember a lot of it, but the thing that's still most vivid in my mind is that short period of my life.
Do you think that defined your life, World War II?
Probably, yeah. You know, there's so many things come to mind. I've given, you know, talks in schools, middle schools, and you know, you have to watch what you're saying. And then I've talked in front of military organizations, and I kind of got two stories. One is a generic one, but no, you know, there'll never be another war like that. And my dad was in the First World War, and he got gassed and he died at 52. My brother, he was a pilot in Vietnam, and he was about as old as you could be to be in Vietnam, and I was about as young as you could be and be in the Second World War. But where was I going? But I forget what I was going to say.
That's all right. I want to go back. Can you tell me about the day you guys landed on Okinawa, and were you thinking that you were going to hit pretty heavy resistance going in?
Well, you know, I'd had zero combat experience, and you know, there was, you'll read it in the book, there was, you know, you seen some civilian, you seen a dead Japanese soldier here or there, but you know, it seemed like it was going to be a piece of cake for a while, because they really didn't tell us too much. And and you know, I remember one time we were the artillery, Japanese artillery. They had some pieces that looked like Civil War weapons, but they were very accurate, and they could drop a shell where they wanted to drop a shell. They had that really zeroed in. And I remember one time I was in a foxhole, and we'd been under heavy artillery fire, and I was just shaking and kind of uncontrollably. And cigarettes, they had cigarettes, 3 cigarettes in your C rations, and cigarettes were available. You know, they had them available. You know, you could have all you wanted. And I lit up a cigarette, and all of a sudden I just looked at my hands, and I noticed I was as steady as the Rock of Gibraltar. So that kind of made me realize just how much, what a powerful stimulant cigarettes were to calm you down like that.
Is that the first time you'd ever smoked?
I never smoked before then, no, and I didn't smoke afterwards. There's 1,000 things I could probably say and can't remember. Can't remember any of them.
That's all right. Do you remember your first time in combat or actually being under fire from the Japanese?
Well, you know, there was a number of us replacements in the company, and we were all privates, buck privates, and anyway, we had been under heavy artillery fire, and we were all 18 years old. And anyway, the company commander, later on, he commended us for the way we conducted ourselves, and we became PFCs. Got promoted, but no, I was scared shitless. But you know, you didn't dwell on it.
Did you ever feel yourself getting close to cracking up, or what I don't know what they call it, battle fatigue? Or
No.
Did you ever see anybody succumb to that?
You know, I see all this, what they call PF, whatever, and I kind of wonder about it, you know. During the Depression, I could tell you some stories. I was just young, but, you know, it was a case of survival, and I think it toughened you up. And so I really think that we had, you know, that toughened you up and then give you a little bit more fortitude and backbone than what maybe 18-year-old kids have today. But I know they call it battle fatigue. Yeah, and but I personally never seen one. I know we had a lieutenant. The only time he got out of his hole was when the company commander or the battalion commander came around, and he got relieved. But I don't think I think he was just a coward. And but I know I never seen anybody, and like I went to a American Legion guy meeting last night, and there was a new guy there, and anyway, he had some kind of psychological problems, and I guess there was a lot of it. I just personally didn't see it.
What about after the war? Did you have trouble with nightmares or flashbacks or anything like that?
Not really. I was too busy chasing women.
So you talked about that bonsai charge at Shuri.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit more and tell me what you remember about that night?
Well, you know, it was just they kept coming, and there was 5,000 of them. Of course, you know, your world is about this far on both sides of it, you know, so you don't know what's going on down the line. But no, they just kept coming in waves and getting mowed down. And there was they figured there's about 5,000, and out of that 5,000, most of them were probably killed. They didn't care whether they died or, you know, that was part of the program, I guess.
Were you on the machine gun at that time, or what was your job?
No, I became a second gunner, but I wasn't on the gun at that time. I was firing a rifle.
What kind of rifle did you carry?
Well, I tell you, in a heavy weapons company, you carried a carbine. It was a smaller rifle. It was a 30 caliber rifle, and the shell was smaller. It was 30 caliber, and you carried that. But I picked up an M1 after a while.
Why was that?
Because when you hit something with it, it stayed hit.
I've also heard complaints about the carbine from guys saying that Japanese soldiers especially would keep coming if you hit them.
I think I hit one time with it about 6 or 7 times, and he kept coming.
How close did he get to you then?
Pretty close. Speaking of close, we'd been under artillery fire probably for the best part of 3 days, and anyway, there was 2 of us in the hole, and it was my turn to be on guard, and I dozed off for just a second, and I heard this noise, and I looked up, and I seen this Japanese. He had to be an officer, and he had a samurai sword, and I could see him outlined against the sky, but he couldn't see us in the hole, and he was reaching down with his sword, flacking around with his sword, see if anything was in the hole, and my buddy come to just about the same time as I did, and we both shot him about the same time, and he come in the hole with us, and anyway, my buddy got the sword because I was the one that screwed up. He didn't say anything and I didn't say anything, but falling asleep, 3 days, and it was just cat naps during that time, and I just involuntarily dozed off for a second, and that was absolutely something you didn't do. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your physical state, and because you weren't getting much sleep, and then I understand that you're pretty filthy as well. Can you?
Oh yeah, there was no such thing as baths, and I remember one time I getting eaten chow. I opened my mouth, and the fly flew in, and I'm trying to spit him out, and I got most of him out, but I tell you what, I was sick. I had the shits, and it was all I could do to walk, and my buddies carried my load for me until I got where I could handle things myself, but
Can you tell me, I've never asked about that aspect of it, maybe it's a little too personal, but when you'd be in those foxholes and you couldn't get out at night and you go to the bathroom, what would you guys do?
Well, there's a helmet. Your helmet was a wash basin, a crapper.
And would you just kind of toss it out the hole? Is that?
You weren't worried too much about it.
Well, what about with the rains and the mud and everything? Would that kind of what would that make for the conditions, I guess?
Well, it rained one time for 7 days while we were on Chocolate Drop Hill, and then nothing moved. They had a hard time getting water up to us, and they had pills that you could put into a canteen of water, and it would purify it, just a little tiny pill. So we drank out of mud puddles for a while.
Were guys coming down with sicknesses or anything like that from the?
I never seen a case of battle fatigue, and I just off the top of my head, I can't really remember anybody getting sick. Except that time I was sick, I remember that.
Yeah, naturally, I guess. So you watched the movie Hacksaw Ridge?
I did.
And you didn't think it was?
Number one, my division was the first one up there, and the Japanese had a name for it, and you'll see it in the book. And everybody had it. And by the way, that's where the Hacksaw Ridge is, where the highest ranking general in the Army in the Second World War got killed, General Buckner. He was a lieutenant general, and he was in command of the 10th Army. And it was after the operation, but Hacksaw Ridge, there wasn't a bush there that was more than 6 inches tall, I don't think. Everything had been blown off. And anyway, he was behind the outcrop of rocks with a swagger stick, and he was waving it, and they dropped an artillery shell, one artillery shell, and they dropped it right on him, a lieutenant general. And we had the nickname. All the divisions had nicknames. Like the 86 was the Blackhawks, and the 104th was the Timberwolves, and the 96 was the Deadeyes. And the reason they were called the Deadeyes is because of the assistant general, General Easley, Brigadier General. He'd been the captain of the American Army rifle team during pre-war, and he really stressed marksmanship. So the division got activated and trained at Fort Ord. Not Fort Ord? I can't. It was in Oregon anyway. And so he stressed marksmanship, and he also got killed on Okinawa. The story is that he was on the front lines directing fire from a machine gun and got shot. And he was a good soldier.
So
I'll tell you another story. It's an after the war story. I was stationed about 30 miles north of Manila, and the 86th Division, they had just come from Europe, and their mission was to reorganize the Filipino scouts because, quite honestly, some of them had a lot of self-promotions, and anyway, and to there was still holdout Japanese in the jungles, and so it was to go into the jungles and with loudspeakers, and some of them surrendered, some of them didn't. But there was a lot of VD in the Philippines, and I come down with a dengue fever, and it was a mosquito-borne, kind of like malaria. And they say it's not reoccurring, but I had a doctor tell me one time it was, because when I had a bouts of it after I got home for a few years. But penicillin would cure anything. So the first time you come down with a case of gonorrhea or something, they give you a shot of penicillin that'd take care of it. But after the second time, they went back to the old treatment. And I was in the hospital about 3 days with a dengue fever, and I'd probably a half a mile or more from the VD section. And you could hear the guys screaming when they went back to the old treatment. They'd run a wire up the penis, and then they'd open up a couple blades, and they'd rip her down, and then they'd lay it on a block and hit it with a mallet. So that was the best cure there was.
that was a pretty good turn, I bet. Oh, wow.
I never had it, by the way.
Yeah, that's fortunate.
But I probably got a lot of relatives over there.
Oh, really? You think so? Were there women over there? Women in that area then?
I'm talking about the Philippines.
Oh, the Philippines. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I never thought of that. The women being in that area and that interaction.
No, I tell you that. Like I said, I started saying one time, that they have no idea how many civilians were killed, but it's anyway from 60,000 to 100,000. And then there was 110,000 military killed. They pretty well kept track of that. It was kind of a contest between the different units, head count, and the civilians being killed, and a lot of them you couldn't trust either, but we could watch them jumping off cliffs at one point, and I remember one, sometimes little insignificant things you remember, but I was the guard, and it was a quiet period, and this old man come up a hill, and he was waving a surrender leaflet in his hand, and he had a cane about this tall, and he had a hold of it, and he was bent over just like a bent over tree, and coming up that hill, and he was holding it up, and I just pointed him to the rear. You'll see a lot of pictures in here too. But anyway, it had something to do with that. Other than that, I can't think of any more to say.
Did you guys take many prisoners, Japanese prisoners?
I tell you, almost. I had a couple things happen. I was a PFC at the time, and I got orders. Was on the line, and I got orders to report to regimental headquarters. And I thought to myself, why would they want me back at regimental headquarters? And anyway, I went to the company command post, and there was 3 other guys there that were headed back too, and they had about a half a dozen Japanese prisoners, and we got a message from the regimental commander saying that he wanted those prisoners to get back there alive, and he'd be watching us every step of the way. And so we got the prisoners back okay. There was one guy from a company, I forget which company it was, but his company had a record of never having taken a prisoner. And there was different things happening. I remember we ran across some Marines that had been a group of them. I don't know what had happened, but the Japanese, they had been killed, and the Japanese just cut them up in pieces. And when you see something like that, I seen different things happen. But anyway, my reason for going back to the regimental headquarters, I had a dental appointment. They pulled me off the front lines for a dental appointment, and I walked into the dentist. He had a tent, and he had one chair there, and he had a GI on a bicycle, and he was pedaling the bicycle. That's what powered the drill, and I was never so happy to get back on the front lines. He, in the Second World War, if you had a cavity, no Novocaine. The only time they used Novocaine is if they pulled a tooth. So I was almost glad to get back on the front lines.
I bet. Wow. I can't imagine that. Oh.
And something else? There's a lot of statistics, and the ones that I've heard, and whether they're true or not, but they say for every one that's seen combat in the Pacific, 1 out of 10. They said in the European theater, 1 out of 7 seen combat, and the difference for the distance in the supply line. So there was 9 support troops for everyone that's seen combat.
That's interesting. It's a big disparity.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. Huh. When you talked about getting hit by a little bit of phosphorus,
Uh-huh.
What did that feel like?
It burnt like hell. Yeah, I think about chemical weapons, but we used a lot of phosphorus in the Second World War.
I understand you guys had phosphorus grenades. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did you use those on caves, or what was the?
Well, all I ever had was just a regular grenades, but I don't know really what specific, if they had a specific purpose or not.
Interesting. Well, I'll ask you 2 more questions, and then
Okay.
I'll leave you alone. So, what advice do you have for young people today?
Get your nose out of the cell phones.
That's probably directed. Yeah, that's my problem a little bit, I think.
No, I think enjoy life while you're young. Don't worry about the little things.
Very good. Yeah. Well, my last question is, what does America mean to you?
Cooper.
Well,
Stop.
I think it's kind of a sad thing now that it's divided like it is.
No barking.
And like I say, I was raised during the Depression, and I think it put a little backbone in you. But no, I think it's a sad thing in the country's in the situation it is now. And there'll never be another war like there was in the First World War and Second World War, just be skirmishes here and there. And if there's ever a big one, it'll be a fast one. So,
I think you're right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Before you go, could you state? You said your name, serial number, and then what unit you were in. Could you say that one more time, just to make sure we got it on the?
I had the honor. Excuse me. I had the honor to serve in H Company, 2nd Battalion, 382nd Infantry Regiment, 96th Infantry Division in the Leyte Campaign and Okinawa Campaign. I served after the war up until about 1946 with the Company A, 311th Combat Engineers in the Philippines on Luzon Island, and I served with the 104th Division in the Army Reserve during the Korean War.
Very good. Very good. And what did you do? I said it was one last question. What did you do after the war? You said you worked for a company.
I worked for Continental Baking Company. I started with them when I was 16, and you didn't have to be 18 at that time to work around machinery. And I lost a finger. It wasn't a war injury. I lost it in a bakery. But I started out mopping floors, and I had a limited education. And I went to school and worked at the same time. And I just got the equivalent of a CD, what they call CED, so I didn't have a good education, but I persevered. I was superintendent in 3 different plants, and I was sent around as an advisor on a number of occasions, and I had a job. I liked it. I didn't become a millionaire or anything, but I had a good living. And I enjoying your work is important. You have to enjoy what you're doing.
Well, I'm enjoying what I'm doing right now. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me.
I figured you were wasting your time.
No. Yeah, that was fantastic.
There's some phone numbers in here that I don't know if you'd want them. Last time I talked to this Don Deckner, he wrote the book.
Oh, okay.
And it took a lot of research.
Oh, I bet.
And anyway, last time I talked to him, and it's been a number of years ago, he
Wow.
Camp Adair, Oregon, that's where they took their turn.
Oh, okay.
Here, 96 Kelly received Medal of Honor.
What kind of souvenirs did your son take that you had? Were those flags and things of that sort?
I had flags, and one time we went through a sugar refinery mill, and we blew the safe open, and there was 100 yen bill in there. And that time, a 100 yen bill, and they say that money was good for a year after the war. It was stacked, the 100 yen bills was stacked like cordwood, and we scattered it at the four winds, and it was still negotiable currency. I had a couple Japanese flags. I had a Japanese pistol. I remember one time I got the pistol. We were standing on top of a pill box that had just been blown, and I'm standing right on top of a pistol, and Japanese pistol, and another GI seen it, and he come running over and took a dive, but I got it before he did. But of course, then my son got it, and I don't know what happened to it. Would you want to take this with you and maybe send it back to me or something?
Yeah, sure, if you don't mind.
No.
That's excellent. I really appreciate it.
Because there's some phone numbers in there.
Oh, okay.
You might be able to get to call some of them. And I'd say that Don Deckner, I don't know if he didn't do good on the phone. He might be dead by now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, when I send the discs and everything, I'll send this with...
Okay.
I'll stick this in. I appreciate it. And, oh, yeah, I wondered, would you sign... Whoops. Would you sign this for me?
All right.
I got a pen. I was just using one. There you are.